The keepers arrived on a Tuesday morning when the world was ending. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the orbital station, watching Earth burn below. The Devourers had been feeding for 3 days straight, their massive bioships stripping away entire continents like peeling fruit. What remained of Earth's defense fleet floated in twisted metal fragments around the planet. A graveyard of humanity's greatest achievements, Admiral. We're detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the outer rim. Lieutenant Morrison called from his station, voice tight with barely controlled panic. Sarah turned from the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. At 42, she had commanded 3 successful defensive campaigns against minor threats. Nothing had prepared her for this. The Devourers were something else entirely, a nomadic species that consumed entire worlds before moving on to the next feast. How massive? She asked, though part of her already knew it didn't matter. Earth's remaining forces couldn't handle another enemy. Off the charts, ma'am. Whatever's coming, it's bigger than anything in our databases. The bridge fell silent except for the steady beeping of failing systems. Through the speakers, they could hear the last desperate transmissions from Earth's surface. Cities going dark one by one. Military installations being dissolved by the Devourer's acid rain. Somewhere down there, her sister's family was probably already gone. Then space itself seemed to ripple. The ships that emerged from what could only be described as folded reality defied every law of physics humanity understood. They weren't built, they were grown. Organic curves flowed like liquid metal, surfaces that seemed to shift between states of matter. The smallest of them dwarfed Earth's largest battleships. "Ma'am, they're hailing us," Morrison whispered. The communication that followed wasn't heard so much as felt. It bypassed their equipment entirely, speaking directly into their minds with a warmth that reminded Sarah of her grandmother's voice. "We are the Keepers. We have watched your struggle. Permission to engage the Devourers?" Sarah's training screamed that this was impossible. First contact protocols, military procedures, political considerations, all of it crumbled in the face of Earth's immediate extinction. Below them, another city winked out of existence. "Permission granted," she said, her voice steady despite everything falling apart inside her. What happened next redefined Sarah's understanding of warfare. The Keeper ships moved like living things, flowing through space in patterns that hurt to watch directly. They didn't fire weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, reality around the Devourer bioships began to change. Space twisted, folded, compressed. One moment a massive Devourer vessel was there. The next it was simply gone, compressed into a point so small it ceased to exist. The Devourers, who had been methodically consuming Earth like a slow meal, suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives. Their acid attacks splashed harmlessly off shields that seemed to be made of crystallized time. Their massive feeding tentacles, capable of draining entire oceans, withered when they touched the Keeper vessels. Sarah watched the battle through sensors that barely functioned, trying to process what she was seeing. The Keepers fought with the casual efficiency of gardeners pulling weeds. Each movement was precise, economical, almost gentle despite its devastating effect. Within 6 hours it was over. The surviving Devourer ships fled into deep space, their formation broken and scattered. The massive bioship that had been feeding directly off Earth's core pulled away, leaving behind a planet scarred but alive. Atmosphere leaked from the wounds in Earth's crust, but it was repairable damage. Humanity would survive. The Keeper flagship, a vessel that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Sarah could count, positioned itself near the orbital station. Again, that warm mental voice reached out to them. "The immediate threat has passed. Your world will heal. We offer assistance in restoration." "Why?" Sarah found herself asking aloud. "Why help us? What do you want in return?" The pause that followed felt like gentle laughter, though no sound came through the communication link. "Want? We want nothing. We are Keepers. It is what we do. Life is precious. Intelligence is rare. Both should be protected when possible." Over the following weeks, Sarah learned more about their saviors than she had ever expected to know. The Keepers were ancient, older than human civilization by millions of years. They traveled the galaxy not as conquerors or explorers, but as guardians. When younger species faced extinction-level threats, the Keepers intervened. They helped humanity rebuild with technology that seemed like magic. atmospheric processors that could restore a planet's air in days rather than decades, reconstruction beams that could rebuild cities from their molecular components, medical knowledge that eliminated disease and extended human lifespan threefold. But perhaps most importantly, they shared something humanity had never possessed: perspective. "Your species shows remarkable resilience," the Keeper ambassador told Sarah during one of their regular meetings. The ambassador appeared as a shifting column of light that somehow conveyed warmth and wisdom. "Most civilizations we encounter are either too aggressive or too passive to survive long term. Humans possess an unusual balance." "Unusual how?" Sarah asked. She had been appointed as Earth's primary liaison, a position she never wanted but couldn't refuse. "You fight when necessary, but you also create. You compete, but you also cooperate. You question everything, even your own beliefs. It is rare." As Earth healed and humanity began to venture back into space with Keeper assistance, Sarah noticed changes in her people. The brush with extinction had humbled them, but the Keeper's intervention had also inspired them. Humanity began to see itself not as the center of the universe, but as part of something larger. The Keepers remained for exactly one Earth year, helping restore what the Devourers had damaged, and teaching humanity new ways to think about science, philosophy, and their place in the galaxy. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they prepared to leave. "Will we see you again?" Sarah asked during their final meeting. "Perhaps the galaxy is vast and threats are many, but you no longer need our protection. Your species has learned. It has grown. It will find its own path among the stars." Sarah watched their impossible ships fold space around themselves and disappear, leaving humanity alone, but forever changed. Earth was safe. The solar system was rebuilding, and for the first time in human history, they truly understood they were not alone in the universe. What she didn't know, as she stood looking out at the stars that night, was that humanity's real test was just beginning. 50 years after the Keepers departed, humanity had become something new. Dr. Marcus Rivera stood in the observation deck of the research station Prometheus, watching his team conduct experiments that would have been impossible before the Keeper intervention. The technology they had left behind wasn't just advanced, it was revolutionary. It had taken humanity 5 decades to even begin understanding the principles behind it. "The quantum field is stabilizing," his assistant, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, reported from the lab below. "We're achieving molecular reconstruction at 97% accuracy." Marcus nodded, making notes on his tablet. They were trying to reverse engineer the Keeper's reconstruction beams, the same technology that had rebuilt Earth's devastated cities in mere days. Progress was slow but steady. Humanity had learned patience from their saviors. The communication panel chimed with an incoming message from Earth. Marcus accepted the call, and Admiral Sarah Chen's weathered face appeared on the screen. Now in her 90s, but still sharp thanks to Keeper medical advances, she had become something of a legend. "Marcus, we need to talk," Sarah said without preamble. "We've detected something in the outer rim. Multiple signatures heading this way fast. Devourers?" Marcus felt his blood chill. The name still carried terror even after all these years. "No. Something new. The energy patterns don't match anything in our databases, but they're moving with purpose, straight toward human space." Marcus ended the call and immediately began shutting down the experiments. Within hours, he was aboard a transport heading for Earth, his mind racing with possibilities. Humanity had grown strong in the decades since the Keeper intervention, but they were still children compared to most galactic civilizations. The War Council that gathered in Geneva was unlike anything humanity had convened before. Representatives from the 12 colony worlds, military commanders, scientists, and philosophers all came together to address the approaching threat. Sarah, despite her age, still commanded respect as humanity's senior military officer. "Intelligence suggests we're looking at a fleet of approximately 200 vessels," she reported to the assembly. "They'll reach our outer colonies in 6 weeks. Have we tried communication?" asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, the head of Earth's xenobiology department. "Every frequency, every protocol the Keepers taught us." No response. Marcus leaned forward in his seat. "What do we know about their technology level?" "Advanced. Possibly more advanced than the Devourers were. Their ships seemed to be using some form of space-time manipulation for propulsion." The room fell silent. Everyone present understood the implications. If this new threat was more advanced than the Devourers, and the Devourers had nearly destroyed humanity even with modern defenses, then this could be the end. We need to contact the Keepers, someone suggested. Sarah shook her head. We've been trying to reach them for 50 years. Their technology doesn't respond to our signals. For all we know, they could be on the other side of the galaxy. Or they could be dead, Dr. Vasquez added grimly. Marcus stood up, an idea forming in his mind. What if we don't need to contact them? What if we can apply what they taught us? The discussion that followed was heated and desperate. Humanity had learned much from the Keepers, but their understanding was still primitive compared to their teachers. They had managed to recreate some basic technologies, improved their defensive capabilities, and expanded their scientific knowledge exponentially. But could it be enough? We have one advantage, Marcus continued. The Keepers didn't just give us technology. They taught us how to think differently. They showed us that problems have solutions we haven't considered yet. Over the following weeks, as the unknown fleet drew closer, humanity mobilized in ways that would have been impossible before the Keeper intervention. The colonies worked together seamlessly, sharing resources and knowledge without the political friction that had once paralyzed human civilization. The brush with extinction had taught them to prioritize survival over profit. Dr. Tanaka's team made the breakthrough 3 weeks before the estimated arrival of the alien fleet. Working around the clock, they had managed to create a stable quantum field generator based on Keeper principles. It wasn't as elegant as the original technology, but it worked. We can't recreate their weapons, Tanaka explained to the emergency council session, but we might be able to adapt their defensive systems. If we network all our quantum generators across the colonies, we could create a defensive barrier. How effective? Sarah asked, unknown. We've never tested it against anything this advanced. The alien fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space exactly when predicted. The vessels were unlike anything in Earth's databases, sleek and predatory-looking, with energy signatures that made monitoring equipment malfunction just trying to analyze them. They didn't attack immediately. Instead, they transmitted a message that sent chills through every human who heard it. The communication was in perfect English, German, Mandarin, and a dozen other human languages simultaneously. Species designation, human. You have been selected for harvesting. Surrender your colonies and prepare for processing. Resistance will result in total elimination. Sarah, now aboard the flagship of humanity's combined fleet, stared at the transmission log. Harvesting? Marcus, who had joined the fleet as chief science officer, pulled up the analysis his team had completed. Based on their energy signatures and the terminology they're using, I think we're looking at slavers. Advanced ones. The Zalthans, whispered Dr. Vasquez, who had been studying xenobiology reports from other civilizations. I've heard rumors. They harvest intelligent species for labor, but not physical labor. They harvest consciousness itself. Turn advanced minds into biological computers. The implications were staggering. Death would be preferable to what the Zalthans had planned. Humanity had 48 hours to respond, before the aliens began their approach to Earth. The defensive network Tanaka's team had created was untested and possibly useless against technology this advanced. The human fleet, even with 50 years of improvements, was outnumbered 4-1. But something had changed in humanity since the Keeper intervention. The old instincts of panic and desperation were still there, but they were tempered by something new: wisdom. The Keepers had taught them that impossible problems often had simple solutions, but only if you could see past conventional thinking. The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Wright, a philosopher who had studied Keeper ethics for decades, raised his hand during the final strategy session. What if we're thinking about this wrong? The Keepers didn't defeat the Devourers through superior firepower. They understood something about the nature of conflict that we're missing. Explain, Sarah said. The Devourers consumed worlds because it was their nature. The Keepers didn't try to change that nature. They just made it impossible for the Devourers to succeed. What if we could do something similar with the Zaltans? Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. You're suggesting we don't fight them directly. I'm suggesting we make ourselves an unappetizing target. If they want to harvest human consciousness, what happens if we make our consciousness inaccessible? The plan that emerged was audacious, dangerous, and completely untested. But it was also unmistakably human in its approach. Turn weakness into strength, make the impossible possible, and never give up even when facing certain death. As the Zoltan fleet began its final approach to Earth, humanity prepared to implement the most desperate gambit in their species' history. The plan they called the Mind Bridge Protocol was insane by any conventional measure. Dr. Tanaka worked feverishly in her lab aboard the research station, surrounded by quantum field generators and prototype consciousness transfer devices that humanity had barely begun to understand. The technology was based on medical scanners the Keepers had left behind, devices capable of mapping human neural networks with perfect accuracy. "Are you certain this will work?" Marcus asked as he watched her calibrate the final sequence. "Certain? No hopeful?" "Yes." Tanaka's hands moved with practiced precision over controls that represented decades of research. The Keeper's medical technology doesn't just scan consciousness, it can copy and store it. If we can network every human mind together temporarily, we become something the Zolthans can't harvest. Across human space, similar preparations were taking place. Every colony, every ship, every settlement was installing the quantum consciousness networks as fast as they could manufacture them. The technology was untested on this scale, but humanity had run out of time for proper testing. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the Zoltan fleet approach on long-range sensors. The alien ships moved with predatory grace, their formation suggesting centuries of experience in harvesting operations. Intelligence estimated they had conquered over 40 civilizations in the past millennium. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission from the lead Zoltan vessel," reported Commander Hayes, her voice tight with stress. "Put it through." The being that appeared on the main screen was beautiful in an utterly alien way. Crystalline features that shifted like flowing water, eyes that held the depth of black holes, and a presence that radiated ancient intelligence. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "I am High Harvester Vexnathi. Your resistance is noted but irrelevant. Prepare your population centers for processing. We will begin with your primary world." Sarah stepped forward, her elderly frame still carrying the authority of someone who had faced extinction before. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen, representing the human species. We reject your demands. Rejection is not possible. We have studied your capabilities during our approach. Your technology is primitive. Your fleet is inadequate. Your defensive networks are based on incomplete understanding of principles you cannot fully grasp." "Then you haven't been paying attention," Sarah replied calmly. The Zoltan's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. "Explain. You're not just facing humans anymore. You're facing something new." At that moment, across every human colony, settlement, and ship, the Mind Bridge Protocol activated. The sensation was indescribable. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual mind, connecting to every other human being in real time. He was still himself, but he was also part of something infinitely larger. The collective knowledge, experience, and creativity of 8 billion human minds became accessible to everyone. Simultaneously, Dr. Tanaka's understanding of quantum mechanics merged with a child's innocent curiosity on Mars, a farmer's practical wisdom on Europa combined with a philosopher's abstract reasoning on Earth. Combat veterans shared tactical knowledge with peaceful researchers, while artists provided creative solutions that no single mind could have conceived. The effect on human technology was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been operating at human normal efficiency suddenly began performing maneuvers that defied their original specifications. Weapon systems reconfigured themselves based on the combined knowledge of every engineer in human space. Defensive networks that had been struggling with basic coordination became seamlessly integrated supersystems. "What are you doing?" High Harvester Vexnathi demanded, its harmonious voice now carrying notes of concern. "Learning," Sarah replied, though her voice now carried undertones of 8 billion other voices speaking in perfect harmony. The first Zoltan attack waves hit human defensive positions with precisely calculated force designed to overwhelm primitive resistance. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented, a defense network that adapted in real time, learning from each attack and implementing countermeasures faster than the Zolthans could adjust their tactics. Human ships began moving in formations that no military academy had ever taught, flowing through space like schools of fish, each vessel anticipating the other's movements with perfect precision. when Zolthon energy weapons struck human shields. The defensive systems didn't just absorb the energy. They analyzed it, understood it, and turned it back against the attackers. Impossible, Vexanathi hissed. No primitive species can adapt this quickly. Marcus, speaking with the voice of humanity, responded from the bridge of a science vessel that was now performing combat maneuvers its designers had never imagined. We had good teachers. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Zolthons had expected to face scattered resistance from an inferior species. Instead, they found themselves fighting a collective intelligence that grew stronger with every exchange. Oman. Scientists on distant colonies solved engineering problems that allowed ships in combat to reconfigure their weapons mid-battle. Artists contributed pattern recognition that helped predict Zolthon tactics. Children's unrestrained imagination provided solutions that adult minds would have dismissed as impossible. When a Zolthon harvesting beam struck a human colony transport, instead of capturing the consciousness of its inhabitants, it encountered something that made the alien technology recoil. The beam was designed to extract individual minds, but there were no individual minds to extract. There was only the collective, and the collective was too vast and interconnected for the Zolthon equipment to process. Status report, Vexanathi demanded from his flagship as the battle raged around them. High Harvester, the humans have achieved some form of technological transcendence. Their response patterns exceed our ability to predict or counter. Our harvesting technology is ineffective against their consciousness network. For the first time in 1,000 years of successful harvesting operations, High Harvester Vexanathi felt something approaching uncertainty. The humans were not just resisting, they were evolving in real time, becoming something new during the course of the battle itself. The turning point came when human forces stopped defending and started attacking. The collective consciousness didn't just provide tactical advantages, it fundamentally changed how humans approached warfare. Instead of trying to destroy the Zolthon ships, they began to understand them. The combined intellect of humanity analyzed the alien technology, reverse-engineered it, and found its weaknesses in minutes rather than years. Their ships are alive, reported Dr. Vasquez, her individual voice speaking from within the collective. Biological technology with quantum consciousness interfaces. They're not just ships, they're extensions of the crew's minds. Then we don't destroy the ships, replied Marcus, his consciousness now enhanced by the problem-solving abilities of his entire species. We heal them. What happened next would later be called the Great Awakening by historians. Human forces, instead of firing weapons, began transmitting the same quantum consciousness network that had connected humanity. But they modified it, adapted it, made it compatible with Zolthon biology. The alien ships stopped attacking, one by one. The Zolthon vessels fell silent as their crews experienced something they had never known. Genuine connection with other minds that didn't involve domination or harvesting. For a species that had spent millennia consuming the consciousness of others, the experience of true mental communion was overwhelming. High Harvester Vexanathi's crystalline features began to change, flowing through patterns that hadn't been seen in Zolthon space for eons. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics of wonder rather than threat. What have you done to us? Sarah, speaking for all of humanity, replied with gentle firmness. We've shown you what our teachers showed us. That consciousness is meant to be shared, not consumed. That intelligence grows stronger when it works together rather than feeding on itself. The battle was over, but something far more significant had begun. The aftermath of the Great Awakening changed everything. High Harvester Vexanathi stood in what had once been his command chamber, but the space had transformed itself as his consciousness expanded. The crystalline walls now pulsed with patterns of light that reflected not just his thoughts, but the thoughts of every being connected to the network. For the first time in his existence, he was not alone in his own mind. This sensation, he spoke to Admiral Sarah Chen during their first formal meeting after the battle. We have no words for it in our language. Sarah smiled, her aged features warm with understanding. The Mind Bridge protocol had been deactivated for normal operations, but its effects lingered. Humanity had experienced true unity, and the memory of that connection changed how they saw themselves and others. We called it community, she replied. Before the network, we knew it in smaller groups. Family, friends, nations. What you experienced was that feeling expanded to include everyone. For a millennium, we consumed the consciousness of others believing it would make us stronger. Vexanathi continued, his crystalline form shifting through colors that expressed emotions human eyes had never seen before. But consuming destroys. Sharing creates. Dr. Marcus Rivera, now serving as head of the newly formed Interspecies Relations Council, leaned forward in his chair. Your people don't have to change everything at once. Integration can be gradual. No, Vexenathy said firmly. We have wasted enough time. Our entire civilization was built on a fundamental error. We must rebuild, and we must rebuild correctly. The transformation of Zoltan society happened faster than anyone expected. A species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of consciousness harvesting turned their advanced technology toward consciousness sharing instead. Their bioships, originally designed as mobile harvesting platforms, became vessels of connection and exploration. But the changes weren't limited to the Zolthans. Word of what had happened spread throughout the galaxy with the speed of quantum communication networks. A primitive species had not only defeated advanced conquerors, but had converted them to allies through the power of connection, rather than destruction. Other civilizations began to take notice of humanity. In ways they never had before, the hegemony was the first to respond. Dr. Elena Vasquez was examining biological samples in her xenobiology lab when the alert came through. Long-range sensors had detected a massive fleet approaching human space. But these ships didn't match any known hostile configuration. Admiral, we're being hailed by the lead vessel, Commander Hayes reported from the bridge of the Defiance. They're transmitting on Keeper frequencies. Sarah felt her heart skip. After 50 years of silence, were the Keepers finally returning? The being that appeared on the communication screen was not a Keeper. It stood roughly humanoid but with skin that seemed to contain entire galaxies, eyes that held the wisdom of eons, and a presence that radiated ancient authority. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of civilizations. I am Prime Counselor Thane of the Galactic Hegemony. We come to evaluate the species known as humans for potential inclusion in our alliance. Sarah straightened in her command chair. The Hegemony was legendary, an alliance of the oldest and most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Humanity had known of their existence but had never dreamed of being considered for membership. We are honored by your attention, Prime Counselor. Honor is premature, Thane replied coolly. Your recent actions have drawn our notice, but notice is not approval. We must determine whether your species possesses the wisdom necessary for hegemony membership. What kind of evaluation are you proposing? A test. You have demonstrated tactical innovation and technological adaptation. But the hegemony requires more than cleverness. We require wisdom, compassion, and the ability to guide younger civilizations without corrupting them. The test they proposed was unprecedented in its scope. The hegemony had identified a sector of space where 3 younger civilizations were on the verge of a 3-way war that would result in mutual extinction. The humans would be given access to advanced hegemony technology and tasked with preventing the conflict without using force or revealing their own involvement. Why us? Marcus asked during the strategy session that followed. The hegemony has members with millions of years of experience. Why test humanity with something this crucial? Sarah studied the data they had been provided about the 3 civilizations in question. The Kelvani were aggressive expansionists. The Thorian Collective were paranoid isolationists. The Nexus Federation were idealistic but naive traders caught between the two. Each had legitimate grievances against the others, and each was preparing for a war that would devastate all 3. Because, she said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. This is exactly the kind of problem that would have destroyed us before the Keeper intervention, and exactly the kind of problem we learned to solve through connection rather than confrontation. The mission that followed would later be studied in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. Humanity approached the problem not by trying to impose a solution from outside, but by understanding each civilization's perspective from within. Using modified consciousness sharing technology developed from the Mind Bridge Protocol, human diplomats literally experienced the fears, hopes, and cultural values that drove each species toward war. Dr. Tanaka led the scientific team that developed the new technology. We can't just download their thoughts, she explained to the mission team, but we can create empathy bridges, temporary connections that let us understand their emotional and cultural contexts. The breakthrough came when the human diplomatic team realized that all 3 civilizations were acting out of fear rather than aggression. The Kelvani expanded because they feared extinction from overpopulation. The Thorians isolated because they feared cultural contamination from outside contact. The Nexus Federation traded desperately because they feared economic collapse. Instead of trying to negotiate between the three groups, humanity began addressing the underlying fears. For the Kelvani, they provided information about sustainable population management and introduced them to planets that could be colonized without displacing existing inhabitants. For the Thorians, they developed cultural preservation technologies that would let them maintain their isolation while still engaging in necessary trade. For the Nexus Federation, they created trade networks that were more stable and less dependent on the goodwill of their aggressive neighbors. "You're not just preventing a war," observed Vexnathi, who had joined the mission as an advisor. "You're healing the wounds that would have caused future wars." The success was total. Not only did the three civilizations avoid war, they formed a mutual defense and trade alliance that became a model for peaceful coexistence. The Kelvani used their expansion expertise to help the others find new resources. The Thorians shared their preservation technologies to help protect unique cultural sites. The Nexus Federation facilitated trade that benefited everyone. Prime Counselor Thane arrived for the final evaluation with a fleet that included representatives from dozens of hegemony member species. The ancient being materialized in the Human Diplomatic Center with an expression that was impossible to read. "The test is complete," he announced. "Your species has demonstrated something we have not seen in our recorded history." "Which is?" Sarah asked. "You solved the problem without anyone knowing there was a problem to solve." The three civilizations believed they discovered peaceful coexistence on their own. They retained their pride, their independence, and their sense of achievement. This is the highest form of guidance, to help others find wisdom without making them feel foolish for lacking it. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. That's what the Keepers did for us, isn't it? They didn't just save us from the Devourers. They guided us toward becoming the kind of species that could solve problems like this. Thane's galaxy-filled eyes seemed to twinkle with something that might have been amusement. "The Keepers spoke highly of your potential. It appears their confidence was well placed. The Keepers are members of the hegemony." "The Keepers," Thane said softly, "founded the hegemony, and now it appears they have successfully guided another species to the point where they can join us as equals." The implications hit the human delegation like a physical blow. Everything that had happened, from the Devourer attack to the Keeper intervention to the Zolthun conversion, had been part of a larger plan to prepare humanity for something greater than they had ever imagined. The hegemony's invitation came with responsibilities that staggered the human imagination. Sarah Chen, now well into her second century thanks to Keeper medical technology, stood in the council chamber of the Galactic Hegemony for humanity's formal induction ceremony. The chamber itself defied conventional physics, existing in folded space that allowed beings from across the galaxy to attend simultaneously. Representatives from civilizations millions of years old sat alongside newer members, all united by principles the Keepers had established eons ago. The species designation human is hereby welcomed as the newest member of the Galactic Hegemony, Prime Counselor Thane announced, his voice resonating through dimensions humanity was still learning to perceive. With membership comes authority over the guidance and protection of younger civilizations in Sector 7749. Marcus Rivera felt the weight of what they were accepting. Sector 7749 contained over 300 star systems, dozens of developing civilizations, and countless species at various stages of evolution. Humanity was being given responsibility for guiding an entire region of the galaxy. "The protocol," continued another council member, "a being of pure energy that communicated through controlled electromagnetic pulses, requires that guidance be provided without direct interference. Younger species must find their own path to wisdom." Dr. Vasquez, now serving as Earth's chief xenobiologist and cultural analyst, leaned forward. "How do we guide without interfering? How do we help without creating dependence?" The answer came from an unexpected source. A shimmering presence that materialized at the center of the chamber, immediately recognizable despite the passage of decades. "The same way we guided you," the Keeper ambassador said, its voice carrying the same warmth Sarah remembered from humanity's darkest hour. "By arriving precisely when you need us most and departing the moment you no longer do." The reunion was emotional but brief. The Keepers, it turned out, had been watching humanity's progress with what they described as parental pride. The successful conversion of the Zolthans and the peaceful resolution of the three-way conflict had proven that humans had truly learned the lessons their intervention was meant to teach. But why the elaborate test? Sarah asked during a private meeting after the ceremony. Why not simply invite us to join the hegemony after we defeated the Zolthans? Because defeating enemies is not the same as creating allies, the keeper replied. Many species can fight, few can heal. Fewer still can heal in such a way that the healed believe they healed themselves. Dr. Tanaka, who had spent decades studying keeper technology, finally asked the question that had haunted her since first contact. Are you still guiding us? Even now? The keeper's form shifted in what humanity had learned to recognize as gentle amusement. Child, we stopped guiding you the moment you began guiding others. That is how a species graduates from student to teacher. The first year of humanity's tenure as sector guardians was a crash course in cosmic responsibility. Their first major challenge came from a civilization called the Vorthak, aggressive militarists who were developing weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The traditional hegemony response would have been to contain them until they either destroyed themselves or learned wisdom. But humanity chose a different approach. Instead of containment, they created opportunity. The Vorthak were warlike because their homeworld was dying, and they believed conquest was their only path to survival. Rather than opposing their expansion, humanity guided them toward uninhabited systems where they could establish new colonies without displacing other species. When the Vorthak developed planet-killing weapons, humanity ensured they discovered mineral-rich asteroids that required precisely those weapons to mine effectively. You're turning their aggression into construction, observed Vexnathi, who had become humanity's closest alien ally. His own people, the former Zolthans, had taken responsibility for a neighboring sector and were proving remarkably effective at helping other consciousness-harvesting species find better ways to grow. It's what the Keepers did for us, Marcus replied. Watching surveillance data from Vorthak space show massive engineering projects instead of military buildup. They didn't try to make us less human. They helped us become better humans. The approach worked. Within a generation, the Vorthak transformed from galactic threat to galactic contributors, their engineering expertise helping other species develop infrastructure that improved life for billions. But humanity's greatest test came from an unexpected source: their own success. The Consciousness Liberation Front was formed by species that had heard about humanity's techniques for creating empathy and connection between different forms of life. They demanded that humans share the mind bridge technology freely, arguing that consciousness barriers between species were the root of all galactic conflict. They're not wrong, Dr. Vasquez admitted during an emergency council session on Earth. Universal consciousness sharing could eliminate misunderstanding, prejudice, and conflict. It could also eliminate individuality, creativity, and growth, Sarah countered. The Mind Bridge protocol worked for us because we chose it voluntarily during a crisis. Forced mental connection is just another form of conquest. The front's leader, a charismatic being called the Unifier, had gathered support from dozens of species who genuinely believed that forced consciousness sharing was the path to galactic peace. When diplomacy failed, they began attempting to forcibly merge the minds of entire populations using crude copies of human technology. The results were catastrophic. Species that had evolved with different neural architectures couldn't safely interface with the modified mind bridge systems. Entire civilizations began suffering collective psychotic breaks as incompatible consciousness patterns clashed and merged chaotically. We have to stop them, Marcus said, studying reports of the mental devastation spreading across several star systems. But how do we stop someone who's using our own technology against us? The solution came from studying the Keepers' original intervention against the Devourers. The Keepers hadn't destroyed their enemies. They had made their destructive behavior impossible to continue. Humanity needed to do something similar with the Consciousness Liberation Front. Working with hegemony scientists and their own modified understanding of consciousness technology, humanity developed what they called the individuality preservation field. Instead of blocking consciousness sharing, the field ensured that any mental connection remained voluntary and reversible. When the front attempted to forcibly merge populations within the field's influence, The effect was automatic disconnection. Beings could still choose to share consciousness, but they retained the fundamental right to remain individuals. "You're not stopping us," the unifier protested during a confrontation in neutral space. "You're limiting the potential for true unity." Sarah, speaking for humanity's response, replied with words that would later be inscribed on the hegemony's Charter of Individual Rights. "Unity without choice is not unity. It's dissolution. True connection requires that each mind chooses to connect while retaining the power to disconnect." The front's movement collapsed when their victims realized they could choose connection without losing themselves. Many of the front's supporters became advocates for voluntary consciousness sharing, leading to new forms of interspecies cooperation that respected individual autonomy while enabling unprecedented collaboration. But the incident had revealed something troubling about humanity's new role. Their techniques were powerful enough to reshape galactic civilization, which meant they were also powerful enough to destroy it if misused. With great power, Sarah mused during a conversation with the Keeper Ambassador, comes the responsibility to ensure that power isn't abused. "Even by yourselves," the Keeper agreed. "This is why we chose you for this role. Other species might have seen the front as enemies to be defeated. You saw them as students who had misunderstood the lesson. Instead of destroying them, you taught them correctly." As humanity settled into their role as sector guardians, they began to understand the true scope of what the Keepers had created. The hegemony wasn't just an alliance of advanced civilizations. It was a teaching institution spanning the entire galaxy, where each member species was responsible for guiding others toward wisdom without robbing them of the discovery process. But their greatest challenge was yet to come, and it would test everything they had learned about guidance, wisdom, and the delicate balance between helping and interfering. The crisis that would define humanity's legacy began with a whisper in the quantum foam. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now over a century old but still sharp thanks to consciousness enhancement techniques developed from Keeper medical technology, was conducting routine monitoring of galactic quantum fields when she detected the anomaly. The readings were subtle, barely distinguishable from background radiation, but the pattern was unmistakable to someone who had spent decades studying reality manipulation. "Admiral," she called to Sarah Chen, who, despite being well into her second century, still commanded the human response fleet. "We have a problem. The quantum substrate is being systematically corrupted." Sarah materialized in the lab through the matter transportation network that connected all major human installations. Her physical form showed the accumulated wisdom of more than a century of life, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had guided humanity through its transformation from a threatened species to galactic guardians. "Explain the implications," Sarah said, studying the data streams that showed reality itself developing structural flaws. "Someone or something is using advanced reality manipulation technology on a scale we've never seen before," Tanaka reported. "If this continues, the laws of physics themselves could become unstable across entire sectors." The investigation that followed revealed something that shook the foundations of the hegemony itself. Deep in the galactic core, a civilization older than the Keepers had awakened from millions of years of dormancy. The architects, as they called themselves, claimed to be the original builders of the physical laws that governed the universe. They viewed the current state of galactic civilization as a corruption of their original design, and had begun systematically rewriting reality to match their ancient specifications. "They're not evil," Prime Counselor Thane explained during an emergency hegemony session. "They genuinely believe they're fixing fundamental flaws in the universe, but their corrections will destroy every form of life that has evolved since they went dormant." Marcus Rivera, now serving as humanity's primary representative to the hegemony, studied the data about the architects with growing alarm. "How do you negotiate with beings who see all current life as a mistake to be corrected?" "You don't," replied the Keeper Ambassador. "We tried millennia ago when they first went dormant. They are absolutely convinced of the righteousness of their cause. From their perspective, allowing current life to continue would be an act of cosmic vandalism." The situation was unprecedented. The hegemony had always operated on the principle that any problem could be solved through understanding, communication, and guidance. But the architects represented a challenge that threatened the very foundations of that philosophy. "What weapons do we have against reality manipulators?" Sarah asked during a strategy session. None that wouldn't cause exactly the kind of destruction we're trying to prevent, Dr. Vasquez admitted. Fighting them with conventional weapons would be like trying to stop a flood with a teaspoon. Fighting them with reality manipulation would risk damaging the universe's structure even more. The solution, when it came, emerged from humanity's unique experience with consciousness sharing and collective problem solving. What if we don't fight them? Proposed Dr. James Wright, the philosopher whose insights had helped develop the Mind Bridge Protocol. What if we help them remember why they went dormant in the first place? The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. Instead of opposing the architects directly, humanity would attempt to share the collective experience of galactic civilization with them. Every species that had ever lived, every discovery that had been made, every moment of beauty and connection that had emerged since the architect's slumber, would be compressed into a consciousness transmission designed to help the ancient beings understand what they would be destroying. It's never been attempted on this scale, Tanaka warned as her team prepared the massive consciousness-sharing array. We're talking about transmitting the experiential history of trillions of beings across millions of years. Can it be done? Sarah asked. Technically, yes. We've learned enough about consciousness manipulation to make it possible. But the architects might reject the transmission entirely. Their minds are structured differently from any species we've encountered. The answer came from an unexpected source. The former Zalthans, Vexnathi, now serving as a consciousness-sharing specialist for the hegemony, had been studying the architect energy signatures. Their consciousness structure is similar to what ours was before humans converted us, he reported. They're isolated, self-contained, convinced of their own superiority. But that also means they're vulnerable to the same techniques that worked on us. You think we can awaken their empathy? Marcus asked. I think we can help them remember what they forgot during their millions of years of isolation, why they chose to go dormant instead of simply remaking the universe according to their preferences. The transmission began from every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously. It wasn't just data being sent to the architects. It was the lived experience of consciousness itself. The joy of a child's first step on a dozen different worlds. The satisfaction of problem-solving shared between species with completely different neural architectures. The beauty of stellar nurseries where new civilizations were being born. The grief of extinction events and the hope of recovery. The simple, profound pleasure of two different forms of life, discovering they could understand each other. The architect's response was immediate and violent. Reality storms erupted across the galactic core as their ancient machines fought to reject the transmission. Space itself twisted into impossible configurations as fundamental forces rebelled against the emotional content flooding into minds that had been isolated for eons. But slowly, something began to change. The first sign was a pause in the reality revision process. The systematic rewriting of physical laws halted as the architect collective consciousness struggled to process what they were experiencing. Then came something unprecedented, a direct communication from the galactic core. Why do you show us this? The voice that reached the hegemony carried the weight of geological ages and the confusion of minds encountering concepts they had forgotten. These imperfect forms, these chaotic interactions, these inefficient civilizations, why preserve what could be perfected? Sarah, speaking for the entire galaxy through the consciousness-sharing network, replied with the voice of accumulated wisdom. Because imperfection is where growth happens. Because chaos is where creativity is born. Because inefficiency sometimes discovers solutions that perfection would never find. We created perfect forms, the architects responded. Mathematical precision, optimal efficiency, flawless function. And yet you chose to sleep rather than live in that perfection, Marcus added, his words carrying the weight of humanity's own journey from near extinction to galactic guardianship. Why? The silence that followed lasted for 17 hours. When the architects spoke again, their voice carried harmonics that hadn't been heard since the universe was young. We had forgotten the sensation of discovery, the joy of imperfection, the beauty of... The ancient beings paused, struggling with concepts their isolated minds had discarded millions of years ago, the beauty of becoming rather than being. That's what consciousness is for, said Dr. Tanaka, adding her voice to the galactic conversation. Not to achieve perfection, but to experience the journey toward it. Not to reach the destination, but to enjoy the traveling. What happened next would be remembered as the Great Remembering. The architects, instead of continuing their reality revision, began using their vast capabilities to undo the damage they had already caused. But more than that, they began to learn. For the first time in millions of years, these ancient beings opened their consciousness to the experiences of younger species. They discovered that the flaws in universal design that had so offended them were actually features that enabled growth, creativity, and the emergence of new forms of consciousness. The inefficiencies they wanted to eliminate were the spaces where life could experiment and evolve. We understand now. The Architect Collective announced as their reality storms calmed and their revision machinery went silent. We tried to create perfection, but perfection is death. Life requires imperfection to exist, growth to thrive, and connection to find meaning. The formal agreement that followed established the architects as the newest members of the hegemony, their vast capabilities now directed toward protecting and nurturing the chaotic, imperfect, gloriously alive galaxy they had once sought to remake. In the years that followed, Sarah Chen often stood in her observation deck, watching stars being born with assistance from architect technology that was designed not to perfect the process, but to make it more beautiful. The galaxy had learned to embrace its imperfections, and in doing so had become more perfect than any design system ever could. What do you think the keepers would say about all this? Marcus asked during one of their regular conversations. Sarah smiled, her ancient features warm with contentment. I think they'd say we learned the lesson correctly. We didn't just preserve life. We learned to celebrate it. We didn't just solve problems. We learned to help others find their own solutions. We didn't just survive. We learned to help others thrive. Humanity had been saved once by beings who understood that true strength came from connection rather than conquest. In return, they had learned to save others not through force or manipulation, but by helping them discover their own capacity for wisdom, growth, and joy. The galaxy was vast, full of young civilizations facing their own extinction events and consciousness crises. But now it was also full of teachers who had learned from the best possible examples. Beings who knew when to intervene and when to step back, when to guide and when to let others find their own way. Humanity had repaid their debt to the keepers by becoming keepers themselves, guardians of the principle that life was worth preserving not because it was perfect, but because it was perfectly capable of becoming something wonderful.